Today we're discussing investigating the untouchables, those people who seem to be just out of reach when it comes to accountability. My name is Dorian Persaud, and I am the senior lawyer at Persaud Employment Law. We are a team of lawyers who specialize in conducting workplace investigations and helping you to create healthy workplaces through investigations, training, and proactive advice. Today we're going to be looking at the untouchables, but before we get to the slide presentation, I want to issue a special welcome to all of you, and especially those who are joining us for the first time. We hope that you enjoyed today's presentation and that you'll join us for these monthly events and other seminars that we host throughout the year. We'll be sending you information on those events after today's session. For those of you who have been with us for these webinars, you'll know that we do reserve quite a bit of time on the back end for Q&A. So I would encourage you to use the chat function and the Q&A function within there to pose your question to the group. And my executive assistant, Neha, is with me this afternoon. She will feed those questions to me at the conclusion of the presentation. If for whatever reason we don't get to your question, please reach out to me via email or on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to chat with you to work through whatever issue you might be experiencing. When it comes to those who are untouchable and who are difficult to be held accountable, that situation has a huge impact on your workplace and on your workplace culture. And one recent example of that is the case involving Frank Stronach, And as many of you will know, Frank Stronach is a very prominent businessman, started Magna Corporation in 1957, the largest auto parts manufacturer in the world, and has been lauded both for his success in business and philanthropy. And it's only in the last few years, as allegations of misconduct have come to light, that that reputation has been tarnished. He is now facing criminal charges that were laid in July of this year, and those cases are going to trial in Newmarket and in Toronto later this year. Actually, the Toronto case is being heard now, and another case pending in Newmarket in the months ahead. But I'm going to tell you the story of Jane Boone, who experienced misconduct allegedly while employed at the company. And she is, at the time, she was a 19-year-old university student. She had just won this prestigious scholarship from Magna Corporation. It was worth approximately $250,000. And as an engineering student, this was her big start in the corporate world. And as part of that scholarship, she secured an internship with Magna and started working in that role. And this goes back to 1986. And she recounts getting a lot of positive attention from Mr. Stronach and others at the company. And as a young professional, being flattered by that attention, and at the time didn't think anything of it. And at the time, it doesn't appear that that attention was necessarily problematic or in any way anything that she would construe as harassment. But she recounts getting this attention from the founder of the company, and one evening being invited to a shareholders meeting at Roy Thompson Hall, and she attended this meeting, and all of the prominent shareholders were there, and it was a festive event, and drinks were flowing, and she consumed drinks, and throughout the evening And at the conclusion of the evening, it's her evidence that she was quite intoxicated, and Mr. Stronach commented to her, look, you're in no condition to drive back to Guelph. And he personally drove her to a retreat that is owned by the company just outside of Toronto. And she recounts that on that ride, she realized that she had consumed quite a bit of alcohol. And she realized, thinking, oh, geez, I've made a big mistake. I think I'm going to have to sleep with him now. And that's exactly what happened. And following that event, she didn't file a complaint, and she's not part of the individuals who came forward more recently as part of the criminal charges that were laid. Her evidence was that she didn't feel that her complaint would be taken seriously. She wasn't really sure what to do. She was at the beginning of her career, and coming forward would just be detrimental to her career, no matter what the personal cost was to her at the time of having experienced that event. Since these stories have come out, Magna has conducted an internal review, but they've only found one case of harassment that was brought forward against Frank Stronach, and that case was settled. So it appears, from that despite the fact of the misconduct allegedly, happening and those behaviors spanning several years, that there was a culture at the company where folks didn't feel comfortable coming forward with complaints, and senior individuals, including the founder, basically had the freedom, or were insulated from their misconduct. When you have these situations, involving prominent individuals within the organization, oftentimes the first instinct is damage control, right? It's what are we going to do here? How do we protect this person who is the face of the organization? Maybe this individual has won prominent awards. Maybe they've been lauded by the regulatory body or a professional body, right? But these individuals have a very, in some cases, a prominent public profile. And the other element here is also political alliances, right? When you look at an organization, whether that's public or private corporation, there are relationships, and some individuals secure and cultivate relationships with key decision makers, and they reap the benefits of those relationships. So you're going to have this tug of war then within the organization, where you have some folks who might be inclined to protect the individual and will take his or her side, and then you have others who feel quite the opposite. And then another natural reaction that I've seen from employers is, how do we keep this confidential? Because if the press found out about this, they would have a field day. And so there's definitely motivation to avoid negative press around the allegations. So those are the primary concerns that a lot of HR professionals and senior executives, those are the pressures that they face. And there's a range of emotions that they experience when this complaint hits their desk. I would submit that when you go through those emotions and those issues I referenced, that what the focus really needs to be on is on your legal obligations. All right. Has there been potentially, if these allegations are true, is there a violation of your workplace policies or a statutory right? The law requires that, when you're faced with allegations of harassment and discrimination or sexual harassment, that those require a workplace investigation. And so that's a legal obligation, right, that you want to be mindful of as as you weigh all the possible outcomes of what's about to unfold. And then your focus should also be on a healthy workplace, right? When you have your workplace policies, they indicate here's the culture that we're trying to build. Here's the culture we're trying to foster. And these are the behaviors that we want you to demonstrate at work. Well, if you're then selective in terms of who you're going to investigate, and if it's perceived that there's some individuals who can get away with a lot more than others, that has the effect of deteriorating the culture in your workplace, right? Folks look at the policies and say, you know what, they don't actually mean what they say. They don't actually care if I bring my authentic self to work, because they're really they're just concerned about maintaining the status quo, and certain folks can say and do as they please. The other point that I'd like to make here is looking at the consequences if you fail to investigate, right? There, as we see in the situation with Magna, there are certain things happen over time, and they go unreported, and maybe other cases are settled, and you think everything's okay, but these things just build up over time, right? And it's like you're in this pressure cooker, and one day the thing explodes, and you're left with a big mess on your hands. So you might be able to do damage control and to in your mind contain the situation for that given allegation or in that instance. But over time, these things will add up, and there will be consequences both for the individual involved, but also for the corporation and its culture. So I remember, incidentally speaking to someone at Magna. This is going back, 8 or 10 years, and we were having a conversation about workplace investigations, and she said to me, "Well, Dorian, we actually don't have many investigations. We hardly get any complaints." And I thought at the time, that was odd for a company of that size, but now we fast forward, 10 years later, and we can see that, that there were things happening. They just maybe weren't being brought to the attention of management and not being handled in the right way. So how can you overcome some of these challenges? You have a powerful and an influential individual who is accused of misconduct. And, one of the things you want to think about is that investigating these individuals really starts before the investigation, right? It's making sure that you have healthy processes in place. And one of the key areas that you want to focus on is the intake process. How do employees file a complaint of misconduct or problematic behavior with HR? Is there a known process? I've done investigations for many medium-sized and large organizations, and I still have interviews with folks who aren't aware of what that complaint process is, despite the fact that it's known. But and it's published and it's on an intranet site, and there is an HR policy manual that spells this out. But over time, these messages aren't repeated, and you have individuals who truly don't know what the process is, and they just contact a random person in HR because that's who their HR contact happens to be. But if you ask them, is there a specific website, or is there a designated individual or group of individuals who are supposed to receive these complaints, they really have no idea how to advance that complaint. So that's one thing that you want to look at is, the intake process and to what extent that's known. The other aspect of this is who's receiving these complaints, and do you have a single individual that is responsible for deciding whether or not the allegation or the complaint triggers an investigation, or Do you have a committee that's involved? And so you might want to have a triaged approach where, depending on the nature of the allegations or depending on the seniority level of the person involved, then there, certain maybe more serious allegations or those involving senior individuals, those issues and complaints are taken to a committee to then determine what the path forward is. The benefit of that to the organization is that it's less likely that things would be buried at the committee level, right? If you've got a committee who then sits around to discuss the issue, certainly there'll be folks at the table who might advocate in favor of the responding party, but there likely will be other voices at the table that will balance that out and bring in those considerations I mentioned, where you focused on the corporation's legal obligations and the health of the workplace and the negative consequences of not moving forward and taking the appropriate action. So when it comes to investigating senior employees, you can certainly do that internally. You can have an internal workplace investigator to do that work. But you'll need to be mindful of a few factors. One is not just avoiding actual bias, but avoiding the appearance of bias. There's a case that involving Bell Mobility and an employee by the name of Maria Pires Ferreira. And that case involved allegations of personal harassment and workplace violence. And one of the things that the judge mentioned in that case is that Bell Mobility had a manager investigate the responding party. But it turns out that that manager was friendly with the responding party. They socialized outside of work and they had golfed together. They had basically grown up at Bell Mobility and moved up the ranks at the same time. So these were individuals who knew each other. And the judge said, look, for a company that's as large as Bell Mobility, it shouldn't have been a problem to find someone who didn't have that personal relationship with the responding party. And it's not to say that this person was biased in terms of how he approached his work, but it certainly raised the specter of an appearance of bias. And so that's one of the things that you want to be mindful of. So if you are a medium or a large organization, certainly you should be able to find someone who is removed from the parties in the case. This goes for both the complainant and the respondent, and is able to approach that work in an impartial manner. In an impartial manner. You also want to look at the experience of the investigator that you choose. Is this someone who has experience doing this work? We've reviewed the case before involving Home Hardware, where the corporation received an allegation of sexual harassment, and they appointed a manager of HR to do that work. But this particular manager didn't have very much investigation experience, and he actually had no experience conducting a sexual harassment allegation. Not surprisingly, he botched the investigation, and that led to increased damages in that case. So to the extent that you decide to handle this internally, you want to make sure that you have someone who can do the work and in an impartial way and do it with the rigor that is required, because ultimately you're trying to get to the bottom of what happened, right? You're trying to understand what happened. And if you have someone who doesn't meet the criteria or who doesn't feel comfortable asking the difficult questions, then you're not going to get the answers, or you're not going to end up with a conclusion that is helpful for the organization in terms of determining where do we go next. So if you're handling one of these investigations internally, I want to give you some signs that things are going sideways. And one of them is, are you showing deference to the responding party? I've seen organizations who are attempting to investigate a senior person, and their initial communications to the individual are almost apologetic. They're explaining the process, but they're almost saying, hey, you know what, I'm really sorry to bother you with this. We really don't want to investigate, but we have this policy that makes us, requires us to investigate. They're asking for interview dates, and they're like, I know you're busy, but I just need, an hour of your time. When can you fit me in? If you find yourself essentially being apologetic when it comes to introducing the process and introducing the fact that a formal complaint has been filed and that the allegations are serious, and if you're having trouble, just explaining the process and canvassing dates for an interview, that's probably a sign, or that is a sign that things are going sideways, and likely a sign that this is something that should be handled externally. Another sign that things are going sideways is at the investigation interview. And are you shying away from asking follow-up questions, right? I've been in situations where you're interviewing a senior person and they're used to being in control, right? Like they're used to calling the shots. They're not used to being, pinned down and asked to explain themselves and asked follow-up questions to get details that are necessary. And I've experienced individuals who have pushed back. I've had responding parties who have, stood up and physically, tried to, have acted in an intimidating manner. I've had individuals, raise their voice. I've had, individuals, roll their eyes and be dismissive. There's a range of behaviors, right, that individuals will exhibit where they're not telling you, hey, look, here's my position, here's your position, right? They're not actually telling you that where they sit in the hierarchy, but they're telling you that through their body language and through the words that they're using is, look, you need to back off. And if you're then feeling shy about upsetting this person and probing a little bit more, you're not going to get the answers that you need in order to figure out, what happened in that particular case. And again, the corporation's not going to have the information that it needs to determine not just whether or not something happened, but just all of the decisions that occurred along the way. Because when you're conducting the investigation, you're looking first and foremost in terms of making a conclusion on those allegations that were raised, but you're also collecting all of this contextual information in terms of how someone approached another individual in the workplace, how they approached a certain circumstance. If we go back to the situation of Ms. Boone that we outlined at the top of this presentation, you have a young person at an event, an intern actually, at an event of shareholders. She's consuming alcohol, presumably. There's others there who are feeding her drinks. Who's looking out for the individual? Does it not raise red flags that there's an intern at this very prominent event? She's getting a ride home from the founder of the company afterwards. Is anyone there checking in to find out where she needs to get to and that she gets there safely? So prior to any allegation of sexual assault at the end of the night, you have a range of decisions that are being made and problematic behavior, leading up to that event. And so that's what you're trying to get as the investigators, all this contextual evidence, because at the end of the day, if you then conclude, look, this thing didn't happen, management would still want to know what went wrong here, because certainly there are things that we need to fix and that we need to address. Another example of things going sideways is whether or not the respondent is respecting confidentiality, right? When you introduce the process and you let them know, look, the things that we discuss have to be maintained in confidence, that you're not to discuss with others the issues that are the subject matter of the investigation, and to discuss that with anyone in the workplace or connected to the workplace or otherwise involved in the investigation, if they're receiving that information or that caution from you and then going out and maybe speaking with higher ups in the corporation saying, hey, what are you guys doing? Like, why is there even an investigation into this? That's going to be a problem. There's a case involving Corvex Manufacturing and Cavalier, and it's a case involving a senior manager who was terminated after the company launched an investigation into allegations that he was having an affair with his colleague's wife. And during the course of the investigation, they had warned him about the duty of confidentiality, and he ended up during that process approaching the complainant and her husband and trying to make a deal with them to retract their complaint. And the company said, look, we warned you against this. We cautioned you about the importance of maintaining confidentiality, and you breached that. So this is one of the grounds that we're going to rely on in terms of having just cause to terminate your employment. And that was upheld by the court. They found that that was one of the clear-cut examples of insubordination on the part of this employee. So again, if you're seeing these behaviors, you know that things are going sideways, and you have a decision to make in terms of calling the person on that behavior, and also trying to determine if this is something that you can move ahead with internally or externally. Yeah, when it comes to bringing in an external investigator, that's often done where you have a senior person involved, and based on the nature of the allegations and the parties involved, this case carries a high risk of legal liability and potentially litigation. And seeing that down the road, you want someone involved who can investigate the case and who can maintain the integrity of the investigation and do it in a robust way, where when you get to trial, you have an investigation report that is going to stand up to scrutiny. And that's often why, as a firm, we're involved in some of these high-profile cases, is because of our litigation experience and knowing this is what's going to happen if this case gets to arbitration, or if this case gets to court. This is the evidence that is going to come out, and so we work backwards and are able to collect that evidence as we go through the investigation process. So again, the employer has confidence that when these are the conclusions that we report back, you can take whatever steps are necessary, knowing that those conclusions will stand up to scrutiny. But it's important to understand that you can handle these things internally, but going external, is maybe beneficial depending on the circumstances, and just gives you that added level of safety and confidence. So before we conclude, we want to give you some proactive solutions that go beyond your workplace policies. And in terms of addressing this behavior, what we see in many of these cases is that the victims often involve vulnerable employees. And in many cases, these are interns or summer students or junior staff. And from the very beginning, then you might start thinking about, well, what does onboarding look like, right? Do these individuals, are they made aware of our complaint procedure? We talked before about the complaint procedure, and oftentimes it is published, it is known. But from what I've seen in my experience, when it comes to summer students or seasonal workers, we tend to pay less attention to those things just because of the the nature of the employment, right? We look at them differently from the full-time indefinite employees who we anticipate being with the organization for much longer. So for that latter group of employees, maybe in the onboarding, we make more of an effort to let them know, okay, look, here's what our harassment and violence policy looks like, and here's the complaint procedure if you experience problematic conduct. For the junior staff or seasonal staff, temporary staff, Uh, Oftentimes employers don't make the same effort. And so that's one area that you want to look at is, are you letting these folks know, what recourse they have if they start experiencing problematic behavior? Related to that is what check in on these individuals, right? I had a case recently where some younger workers were, being diminished in meetings, and it wasn't necessarily harassment, but just their contributions were being dismissed in a very public way, and they didn't really know what to do with that. It felt wrong, but at the same time, they weren't sure. They didn't feel comfortable coming forward and voicing concerns. Again, it wasn't something that was done to the level where they thought, oh, this is harassment or this is over the top behavior, but it's these little things, right, that happen over time. It happens persistently, and maybe it isn't harassment the first time it happens, but certainly over the course of someone's tenure, these repeated behaviors or these behaviors that then escalate over time, it becomes something larger. So having an ally assigned to these workers, or someone that they know that they can go to when they have concerns, is important. And another solution that you might want to look at is there an anonymous complaint process? Especially when you're dealing with senior individuals or high-profile individuals in the workplace, folks don't necessarily feel comfortable coming forward and reporting that misconduct. So if you have a mechanism where someone can file an anonymous complaint and provide the organization with details of the problematic behavior, that might be a mechanism to make employees more comfortable in terms of voicing their concerns and giving the employer enough information to then can satisfy its legal obligations to look into the alleged misconduct and take the appropriate steps. And just because the complaint is generated anonymously, that doesn't mean that the complainant isn't part of the process as it unfolds. And so I've been part of cases where the complainant, after a third party is brought in, they have, confidence that, okay, something's being done with my complaint, and then they decide to participate in the process because, again, they have confidence that this is being handled by someone on the outside. We have a tool that we're developing to assist with this. So if you'd like more information about that portal, I'm happy to have that conversation with you, and we'll be sharing more information about that in the weeks ahead. Before we move on to questions, I just want to share some insight from a victim in the Peter Nygaard case. Peter Nygaard is another prominent Canadian businessman who made a name for himself in the fashion industry. And there was a victim that came forward, and she indicated that as she experienced sexual harassment from Mr. Nygaard, she endured that sexual harassment for years, but she stayed and endured it because she needed the job. She was a single mother who had immigrated to Canada from Denmark, and she felt that she had very little choice but to continue working. So that was her reality. And again, she didn't come forward with a workplace complaint. She didn't come forward as part of the group of individuals who make a formal complaint to the police and ultimately resulted in charges being laid and a conviction against Mr. Nygaard. But she just indicated, look, this was my reality, and I didn't come forward then, and I just wanted to put it behind me and find peace. So, just because things aren't formally reported, it doesn't mean that there isn't misconduct happening. And part of how you do this job in terms of holding the untouchables accountable is by taking these proactive steps so that folks do feel comfortable and that they do feel that the workplace is a safe place for them to work, and it's a safe place also for them to bring their concerns forward. So you want to focus on building healthy workplaces, and we're happy to support you as you do that work. Again, review your onboarding and intake process, to tighten those up, or to look at ways that you can give employees more confidence in terms of using those procedures, and continue to be diligent in doing your work as HR professionals. And with that, we'll turn it over to questions. So if you have posed your question, I know Neha is in that chat, and she'll redirect those questions to me. And if you're still thinking about it, now's a good time to get those questions into the chat, and I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Hi, everyone. Dorian, we've got one question. What was that case that you were speaking on?
Sorry, we mentioned a few different cases. One was Pires Ferreira and Bell Mobility, and I can send this to the individual afterwards. There was Pires Ferreira and Bell Mobility is one case. Home Hardware was another case that I mentioned, and there was Cavalier and Corvex Manufacturing. That was the case of the senior executive who was fired for breaching confidentiality during the investigation process. So I'm happy to, Neha, we can make contact with the individual who posed the question, or just send those citations to everyone who attended the webinar today.
Thank you. Next question is, what should you do if you're in the investigator and are in the midst of the investigation, then realize you are biased or there's the appearance of bias? Should you continue? Also, what should you do if the respondent is tampering?
That is a fantastic question. So what you do if you're in the midst of the investigation and then you realize that you're biased? That happens in many cases, where you get into a case and it's not something that you can identify necessarily at the outset, but as you get into a case, you really don't like one of the parties. And this is impacting how you interact with the person, and maybe how you're receiving their evidence, and ultimately how you are going to weigh that evidence. And so it is fantastic that this individual has identified that bias, and then basically you just do a redo, right? Like, you just say, you know what, I can't do this work in a dispassionate or in an objective way because of that bias or those feelings I have, and I'm going to take a step back and let someone else come in and start fresh. There's no prejudice to the corporation or to any of the or to the organization or to any of the parties involved. If you step back and do that, there is prejudice to at least one of the parties involved, and you do a disservice to the organization when you move ahead and say, you know what, I'm just going to push through and try my best to do a good job here, and I'll just push these feelings aside. So you definitely want to pay attention to those feelings, and as an investigator, that's exactly what you want to be doing throughout the process, right? Is at the beginning, identify what are the biases that I might be experiencing here, right? And trying to identify those latent biases that might exist. But then certainly as you're going through the process, you're continuing to do that work, and then you ultimately have to make a call when if you're being honest with yourself. So that would be the right approach, is to take a step back and let somebody just start from scratch. Now, a follow-up to that is what you do if the respondent is tampering with the investigation, and that's a serious infraction on the part of the responding party, right? When you start the investigation and you introduce the process, you're telling both parties, look, here are the expectations regarding confidentiality, and you're not to be letting individuals in the workplace know that this investigation is going on, right? So you're not announcing the fact of the investigation, and you're certainly not communicating with witnesses or potential witnesses in the investigation. So if you have a responding party who's doing that, then you have to call them on that misconduct. And we have the case that we reviewed involving Corvex Manufacturing and Cavalier, where that individual was ultimately terminated because it seemed in that case, no matter what the company told him, he just felt as though he could speak to whomever he wanted to, and actually in that case approached the complainants directly and tried to make a deal with them. So it's behavior that happens rarely, but certainly when it does happen, it's not one of those things where you can just look the other way. You have to take a firm stance on it. And in the case of Corvex Manufacturing, they actually said, look, that regardless of the allegations themselves and what else has happened, that infraction in and of itself gives us just cause to terminate your employment. So obstructing the investigation can be a standalone ground for discipline or termination against the employee in question.
Thank you. Our next question is, what would you recommend communication plan be for the organization during a workplace investigation? Is the existence of an investigation always kept quiet, or is there a situation, especially involving high-profile people, where we disclose the investigation?
That's a great question. For the most part, right, and looking at the general case, the fact of the workplace investigation and certainly the contents of that investigation are kept in confidence, right? That is not, the fact of the investigation is not disclosed. The details of the allegations are not disclosed. You want to go through that process and maintain, the reputations and the of all parties involved intact, right? Because while this isn't a trial, it's a workplace investigation, there are very serious rights at stake, and reputations are at stake, right? Like just the fact of the allegations and those being broadcast besmirches someone's reputation, and they have to wear that until the end of the process. And some might argue even after the process, even if they've been found if they've been exonerated and they're not found to have done the thing that they're accused of, it's still been damaging to their reputation. So for that reason, these things are generally, when it comes to allegations and investigations, they're kept in confidence. You do have certain cases though where the individual involved is so prominent, and there's a public interest in the case. I can think of, again, there's a number of cases that come to mind, but just to go in a different context, we see in a lot of cases involving the church where there's impropriety on the part of clergy. There's a community there that's involved, and that are stakeholders in that event. And in those cases, what you often see is that there is some disclosure that that allegations of sexual misconduct have been received. You don't have to get into the specifics of the allegations themselves, but you might just mention generally here are the allegations and here are the number of people involved, and for that reason this person's on a leave of absence until this gets resolved, and we're going through a process, and we hope to get to the truth, and no decisions have been made until we've met with all the relevant individuals and reviewed the evidence. So you're doing your best to not pass judgment at the beginning, but you're in those, like I said, those certain very limited high profile cases, you will announce the fact of what's taking place, and there would be a communications plan that's built around that, and then you do your best beyond that to maintain the integrity of the investigation, and not have information leaking and being disclosed to the media and being openly discussed, and then you reach a conclusion, and then you've got an investigation report that you may then share with the congregation or the stakeholders involved. Excuse me. In the case of CBC, the national broadcaster, the allegations involving Jian Ghomeshi were front page news, since they felt compelled, again, because of the public interest in that case and them being a crown corporation, to make those findings public. So, like I said, generally speaking, that's not the approach that you want to take with your investigations. But when you do have, certain, very prominent individuals, and depending on the context, then you might take those extraordinary steps.
We have another good question. What about in a situation where the respondent is not to be on company property for the duration of the investigation? Should staff be made aware that they are not to be on the premises?
Generally speaking, again, it really depends on the nature of the allegations, right? I don't know if the allegation is that this person is threatening, they're dangerous. I don't know if they're accused of being a sexual predator or something like that, and so they, them physically being present, poses a danger. Usually in those cases, it's enough to just warn the individual that they're not to be on the company's premises. Again, I think there might be some unique circumstances at play where you would then need to warn staff. Look, if you see this individual on site, you need to immediately report that. Again, I can only foresee that being the case if they pose a threat to the health and safety of the general workplace. So again, I would say that's very fact specific. But in the general case, that wouldn't be information that you would need to disclose, beyond the parties.
Thank you. We have another question come in. If the evidence technically fails to meet the preponderance of evidence standard, but the pattern strongly suggests misconduct that is likely to reoccur, what is your professional obligation to the complainant, the respondent, and the organization?
Again, you want to look at the nature of the allegations here, but if you're dealing with someone who, again, a lot of the cases that we've been talking about, involve sexual misconduct. So if you're dealing with someone, and I believe the way the question is framed is that there was no misconduct in the instant case, but there certainly is a likelihood of this individual behaving in this way going forward. Well, that's contextual information then that as an organization you have to take steps to address. You have a duty, right, to the individuals involved, right, to conduct an investigation. You also have a duty to the general workplace to keep them safe. So if you have someone who is likely to reoffend, so to speak, and is going to engage in problematic behavior, if not criminal behavior, then the obligation is to take steps to make sure that person gets the treatment that they need. At the end of the day, you need to have confidence as an employer that this person can go to work and can comply with your policies, can treat other people with decency and respect, is not going to be abusive, sexually or otherwise, to your workers. So if you don't have that confidence in the employee, then you may not have just cause to terminate their employment, again, just based on this hypothetical that there was no finding of misconduct in the instant case. So you may not have that finding to support a dismissal, but certainly if you've lost confidence in that person's ability to, and your trust that they are able to work and that your other workers are safe in their presence, then there's a breakdown in trust in the employment relationship, and likely you have to part ways with that individual.
Thank you. I don't believe we have any more questions.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for those very thoughtful questions and for your participation this afternoon. Again, it's always a pleasure to spend this time with you and to unpack these complex subjects and to help you in your work of conducting these investigations and creating healthy workplaces where you're employed. So thank you very much again for your time. Again, we're going to be in touch with the webinar for next month, and so please look out for that. And to the extent that you are enjoying these sessions, would encourage you to give us some feedback on other topics that you would like us to review, and also share the invite with others, and let's continue to build this community. Thank you very much, everyone, and wish you all the best.